Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to this semester's alternative class program. You have chosen to attend the topic, All Rights Reserved, Understanding and Protecting Human Rights in the Philippines. My name is Jech and Audal, and I'll be your host for this ACP session. You are requested to be in the Zoom room until the end of the activity. And to our YouTube live audience, please stay with us until the end of the ACP webinar to fully experience ACP. Of course, we kindly remind all of you to observe proper etiquette, remain muted for the entire talk proper of the webinar to avoid distracting the speaker and, of course, your fellow participants. Also, may we ask you to please make sure that your Zoom names are your real names for attendance checking. Let me share with you the schedule of today's ACP webinar. There will be two parts. The first part is the talk of the resource speaker, while the second is, of course, the open forum. Should you have any questions or comments relative to the presentation of the speaker or the topic, please post them on the Zoom chat or the YouTube live chat. Please state your name, the school or organization you represent, and your brief comment or questions. Later, during the open forum, we will address them through the speaker. No unrelated and offensive posts, please. Of course, let us all be respectful. These certificates will be given to those who will finish the entire webinar and accomplish the evaluation form. We will provide a link for the evaluation form at the end of this ACP webinar. We hope that you will gain new and useful learning from this webinar, especially as Filipino citizens. It is important for us to understand and protect our human rights, and I believe this will benefit us majorly. To properly begin, may we now invite each one of us to settle down and feel the presence of the Lord for the opening prayer. In the name of the Father, the Son,
I beg to fall in love with Thee, my Lord, with every breath of life I take. I beg to fall in love with Thee, my Lord, its every beat I to Thee forsake. For even if my thoughts fall short of knowing You, and even if my will runs terrified, Your passion thins the darkness of my soul, sheds its light, breathes its life, stills the murmur of the night. I beg to fall in love with Thee, my Lord, with every breath of life I take. I beg to fall in love with Thee, my Lord, its every beat I to Thee forsake. For even if my heart falls short of loving You, and even if if my spirit hides away. Your love for me surpasses all my fears. All I do, all I am, all that I can ever be. I beg to fall in love with thee, my Lord, with every breath of life I take. I beg to fall in love with thee, my Lord. It's every beat I to thee forsake.
In the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Thank you, University Choir, for leading us in that heartwarming prayer. Now, to formally welcome all of us in this ACP offering, we have with us the University President, Father Roberto Ezequiel M. Rivera of the Society of Jesus.
My dear friends, our dear students, a good day to everyone. Diyos marahil na aldaw po sa Indogabos. It is my distinct pleasure and honor to welcome all of you to the Alternative Class Program 2021. We can argue that during this pandemic, we are in a sense already going through alternative classes with our inability to meet face to face, with a lot of the learning and instruction happening online. But my dear friends, I believe the alternative class program reminds us that in the midst of this pandemic and all the terrible sufferings that this crisis has caused, our education should not only continue, it should also flourish and contribute to your total formation. And that is why I am extremely happy that for our alternative class program this year, we have the theme Imagination, striving for a better normal. In striving for this better normal, we are guided by the 4 apostolic preferences of the Society of Jesus. That is, these preferences of showing the way to God through the spiritual exercises, of journeying with the poor, accompanying with the youth, and caring for our common home, the earth, the environment. Using these apostolic preferences as a guidepost, I believe this alternative class program will truly provide us opportunities to go beyond the classroom or even the virtual classroom in order to fire up our imagination and to see the possibilities for human existence and human development in the midst and beyond the pandemic that we are experiencing. My sincerest thanks, most especially to the Office of Student Affairs for organizing the very impressive lineup of talks during this alternative class program. My sincerest thanks as well to all our resource speakers. My wish for all of you is that these alternative class program offerings will be an opportunity for you to truly learn and deepen your understanding of your responsibilities as men and women for others. Again, thank you very much to everyone. Salamat po, asin Dios mabalos.
Thank you, Father Robert, for your presence and welcoming message. It is always an honor to hear from you. Many of you may have taken part in the ACP activities during the old normal, while the others, especially the first-year students, are attending the ACP for the first time and via this online platform. So you may ask, what is ACP all about? Why are we conducting this program even in this pandemic? To know more about ACP, please watch this video.
Hello Ateneans, welcome to your Alternative Class Program, or ACP. I am Jech Audal, your OPA, or Online Public Address Announcer for the ACP. Here is what you need to know about ACP. The ACP is one concrete expression of the Ignatian Formation Program and a major student activity. It is conducted every semester to provide college students with formative topics or activities outside of their regular classroom routine and daily schedule, in support of the university's uniquely Jesuit educational goals. Instead of attending their classes for the day, students choose at least one topic or activity from among the offerings during the ACP day. Carefully selected resource speakers from different fields of specialization are invited to share their knowledge, skills, and inspire students to nurture their personal development, pursue their aspirations, and partake in social advocacies or causes. You may have missed your ACP last semester, and the organizers may not be able to implement a face-to-face ACP at this time, and until the situation permits us to return to the campus and our classrooms, but OSA and its partners are confident that their experience in delivering formation programs and student services via online platforms and the support of the university community shall help in still providing a truly formative ACP experience to students in the new setting. This semester's ACP is designed to make use of available platforms like Zoom, Google Meet, and social media streaming features. Hence, health safety protocols are observed and access of students is assured. The theme #BetterNormal, Activate Your Imagination is a call for us to break from the so-called old normal and to activate our creative imagination to understand not only our personal context but also our social situations and to come up with new and better ways of living in the pandemic despite the limitations. It is a challenge to do action on how we, the Ateneans, can create a better environment for us and the larger society outside the gates of the university, or shall I say, outside our online classrooms. The Better Normal channels the Ignatian concept of magis, discerning to do the greater good in new channels and media, and by doing acts of service and love for God and for the nation. The ACP thus aims that the students are able to first, acquire knowledge and or skills that are relevant to one's interest, talent, skills, passion, advocacy. Next, relate or share the learning and insight gained from the topic or activity in conversation or dialogue and personal reflection. Next, examine the importance of one's interest, talent, skill, passion, advocacy to the development of the society, and seek ways or opportunities by which the gained or enhanced knowledge or skills can be further advanced and used for the benefit of the immediate organization or community or larger society. Listen, understand, discern, share, act. I hope that we will all take to heart our engagement in the ACP. Don't forget to learn and have fun while we experience ACP. Ateneans,
I hope that we now understand the background, objectives, and the theme of this semester's ACP. Hopefully, at the end of this activity, ACP would have a positive impact on our continuing formation in the university. At this point, allow me to introduce to you our resource speaker. Our speaker for this afternoon is a leader, teacher, thinker, lawyer, and social entrepreneur. He is an expert on Philippine constitutional and political law, Philippine, international and domestic human rights law, ASEAN and international environmental law and policy, including climate change, biological diversity, wildlife, protected areas, natural resources, public land, energy, mining, and gas or oil law, the law and policy on international and domestic accountability and liability of public and private actors. Currently, he is a senior fellow of Manila Observatory, where he is also the director of the Energy Collaboratory and acting executive director. He teaches philosophy, environmental law and policy, and international negotiations at the Loyola Schools of Ateneo de Manila University. He teaches constitutional and other political law subjects, environmental and natural resources law, and public international law at the Colleges of Law at the University of the Philippines, Ateneo de Manila, Xavier University, Ateneo de Cagayan, Ateneo de Zamboanga, Ateneo de Naga, Liceo de Cagayan, Lyceum University, Polytechnic University of the Philippines, and Far Eastern University. He teaches graduate school level courses at San Beda University Graduate School of Law, Pamantasan ng Lungsod ng Maynila Graduate School of Law, the Ateneo School of Government, and the Philippine Judicial Academy of the Supreme Court of the Philippines. He is from Cagayan de Oro and has an AB Philosophy degree from Ateneo de Manila, an LLM degree from the University of the Philippines, and JSD or LLM degrees from Yale University. Let us all welcome Dr. Antonio Gabriel M. Viña.
Thank you. Maray na hapon sa Indo-Gapos. Good afternoon, everyone. My wife is actually from Legazpi, so I've picked up Bicolano all these years. Unfortunately, not that fluent. Thank you for inviting me to give this talk to you. I'm going to echo Father Robert, who's a good friend of mine from way back, when he said that the pandemic itself is an educational experience beyond par, meaning to say you'll never get more real than this, even as students. I teach, as has been introduced earlier, I teach in, I think, 15 universities. I teach all over the Philippines, including here in Ateneo de Naga in the law school. I teach 2 sections of administrative law and public officers law, and it's a combined course, election law as well. I teach constitutional law in various places in Mindanao and Metro Manila, environmental law in many schools, because that's my specialization. And I do teach also undergrad philosophy, ethics in Ateneo de Manila, and several seminaries. And I always tell my students, and I have students who are judges, deans, professors, and students who are men, like most of you, I think, undergrad students, and of course, lots of law students. And I always begin my semester now, since the first semester, and even when classes broke down, I mean, for those of us in Manila, I don't know what your school calendar is, but the pandemic hit right at the beginning, like the first month of the second semester last year. So when we resume, for at least for some schools that resume for a few more sessions, I introduce the rest of the course, and then of course in the first semester and now in the second semester, I always start by telling my students, understand that you are the most equivalent experience that you have is that you're in a war. You are in the middle of a war where there's so much uncertainty, where anyone close to you would die in a minute. You think you're safe. I have my students in Ateneo de Naga College of Law. I actually have students also from the faculty of the University of Nueva Cáceres and enrolled in San Beda Graduate School of Law. I have students in Iriga also who are deans and judges. And when I ask them, kumusta yung Bicol, di ba? Kumusta? And I have relatives in Legazpi. And they would always tell me like a month ago, oh, everything's okay here. We can go out. It's not too bad. It's, it's not as bad as it is in Manila, certainly. But, and kampante din ako na okay, safe yung mga kaibigan ko sa Naga. But, in these last 2 months, when every day someone I know dies, the one that has struck me most was a death from Naga, from BMC, an Ateneo de Naga alumnus, and a UP Law alumnus, and my student in UP Law more than 20 years ago, Attorney Dante. Dan, I think Dan also taught here in Ateneo de Naga after his college and eventually became a lawyer, studied in UP Law, was my student in UP Law, and before returning to Naga, worked for me in the Ateneo School of Government. And so I thought everyone was safe in Naga, and then suddenly I wake up in the morning and I see all of this heartbreaking cries by friends devastated by the death of Attorney Adan. So you're not sure. You're not sure what will happen. And that's really what war is all about. For most people, unless you're a combatant, or you're in the middle of a battle, for 90% of the people, even in World War I, World War II, the Japanese occupation, most of the people really don't see action, don't see the fight, don't see the battle. But the idea is that it's so uncertain that suddenly you could be, or your family could be hit. And that's really what we have. And it's in this context that I want to talk to you about human rights, which is my assignment. Originally, I was actually asked to talk about the anti-terror law, but I said I actually can't do a formal presentation of the anti-terror law because I am a lawyer of a group of petitioners, important group of petitioners, questioning the constitutionality of the anti-terror law. I'm right now. I am the lawyer, the lead lawyer. There's several of us, the team of indigenous peoples, and from Cordillera, Etas from Central Luzon, and Lumad from Mindanao, and Moros from Mindanao. So I have a group of Lumad, Cordillera, and Moro petitioners that I represent, and the Supreme Court has ordered us not to talk about the case. So I'm not going to talk about the case. I will talk about the law at some point, but not about the case. I'm not prohibited from talking about the law, but I'm prohibited to talking about the case. And when you ask questions later on, please, I won't answer any question about the case itself, except in general terms. So my counter to the organizers, I said, was, let me just talk broadly then about human rights in a pandemic and what it means. So let me share my screen now. Since this is an alternative class program, hindi ito yung talk lang. This is not a political talk, okay? If you're thinking I'm here to agitate you, especially because you've had arrest over here in Naga, including one of your classmates, I'm not gonna do that because this is not a rally. This is an alternative class where you need to come out of it. It's all right to be agitated, of course. I expect that also. But more important to learn that you come out of here with wisdom, with knowledge and with wisdom. Knowledge is information, so hopefully some new information, but also some wisdom that can help you discern on how to respond to the human rights situation of the country. So let me show you the PowerPoint, and if you can see, it's very ambitious because I want you to come out of this learning, learning, as I said, both information and wisdom. Let trying to minimize the. There it is. Sorry. Okay, no. Sorry, there. Okay, so if you look at the title, it's very ambitious. And I'll try to do this in 30 minutes. 50 years of human rights, and specifically in the Philippines, but because it's human rights and there are humans everywhere in the world, necessarily, it's also 50 years of international human rights. But specifically from martial law, in our case, 1972, to the pandemic. But because I want you to come out here with information about where our rights come from, our legal rights come from in the Bill of Rights, we go beyond 50 years. Martial law, Marcos martial law was 1972, so we will remember that next year. There will be lots of activities trying to remember that awful time in our history. But I will actually go even beyond martial law to way back to the Middle Ages, when the first recognition of rights were accepted. So I'll give the journey of human rights in a country as reflected in our Bill of Rights from its origins up to today, focusing on the last 50 years, obviously ending with the pandemic and how our rights are faring during this time of the pandemic. I want to stress first the lessons from the original documents. This is information you need to know, but there's also wisdom, because I want to stress the philosophical basis for this. I'm sure many of you take philosophy classes as part of your core curriculum, and you'd be able to appreciate the importance of going beyond a statement, going beyond a legal norm, and understanding where is that coming from in terms of vision of the world, in terms of understanding human nature. The three big sources of global and Philippine human rights are three documents from different periods in the history of Western Europe and the history of America. But the middle one, the French Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen, would also have its roots in the Middle East, in Greece, in India, and in China, in philosophers like Confucius and Chuang-Tzu in China, in the great founder of a religion, Buddha, in many Hindu sages, in many later on also Islamic philosophers. And I'll go back to that in a while. But the first concrete document we have is the Magna Carta, 1215, where we introduce a very simple concept, due process. The state must always treat every person fairly. That's if you ask what's due process, fairness. That's all it is. Everyone must be treated fairly. In other words, without arbitrariness, without unreasonableness, in a non-oppressive way. The Magna Carta was a document that the barons of England wrote and told the king, King John, who was an oppressive king, you better accept this contract with us, that you promise to treat us fairly, because if you don't, we will no longer recognize you as king. So they had no choice. He ended up accepting that document. But take note of how imperfect this document was. It wasn't universal. It was only for the barons, only for the rich. And the king still had a lot of powers. It's just that he had to exercise it fairly. He had to give notice. He has to have hearings before he exercised it. It wasn't exactly a democracy that the Magna Carta brought about. But it was a start, an important start. And fairness is based simply on the idea from natural law, from an understanding of human beings as rational, that if we are reasonable, we have to treat each other in a reasonable way. 500 years later, it took 500 years for the concept to expand. We have in France, the French Revolution, which was also not perfect. Even when they succeeded, they killed a lot of people and they killed each other. One lesson always about revolutions, for those of you who are enamored with revolutions, is in all revolutions, everyone kill each other. And the leaders kill each other after, and they fight each other. And that's the nature of revolutions. Because you're able to justify any form of violence, then you will justify violence again and again, even when you win and even as progress. So typical of that. But in a moment of enlightenment of the French Revolution in 1789, they come up with this most beautiful document. Beautiful. Honestly, I fell in love with it when I read the document. You should Google it and read it. It proclaimed the rights of man. It proclaimed liberté, égalité, fraternité. Liberty or freedom, equality, and brotherhood and sisterhood. How can that be bad? It proclaimed freedom of expression, freedom of the press, freedom of religion. So in that moment of genius, the French gave us this declaration. Equal protection, that's very important. That's the concept that later on in America will be used to fight racism and slavery. It's a concept that we'll use to make sure that women have the right to vote. It's a concept that we use in the Philippines to recognize the rights of indigenous peoples and the rights of our Moro brothers and sisters. That's a gift from the French Declaration. And then you have the U.S. Bill of Rights, which is also a true gift. And I put that as last because that's the one that comes to us. The Spaniards never brought us the French Declaration, which was a European continental document. The Spaniards did not want us to have these rights. But these rights are in the Malolos Constitution, because the writers of the Malolos Constitution were Filipinos who studied in Spain, and they're influenced by the French Declaration. But it never became effective in the Philippines. But the Bill of Rights is different, because the Bill of Rights came to the Philippines. When the Americans came to the Philippines, as much as they did such terrible things here in pacifying the Philippines in the Philippine-American War, legally speaking, the first document that the Americans used to govern the Philippines, McKinley's Instructions of 1900, when McKinley sent the American army to fight Aguinaldo, to basically rob the revolution from us. And when that was won, he had to give military instructions. And that was the McKinley's Instructions of 1900. And in that instructions, he said, you must respect the Bill of Rights. But not all of them. Before I go to what the Americans did not respect, just a couple of words about the American Bill of Rights. It was an afterthought. The American Bill of Rights was only adopted after the U.S. Constitution was adopted. Meaning to say, they had a constitution already creating the United States of America, creating the office of the president, creating the Congress, creating the Supreme Court of the United States and the judiciary. No Bill of Rights. And then, as they were ratifying the U.S. Constitution, they suddenly realized that they had created a monster. From a human rights point of view, governments are monsters. Because government can do anything. Government can, the justification of government is we need it for public order, we need it for society. And for a government without a Bill of Rights is a monster. Because a government without a Bill of Rights can do anything. So that's why the U.S. Bill of Rights are amendments to the U.S. Constitution. Amendment 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, until Amendment 10. Which were ratified following the creation of the United States. Hinabol na lang siya. Okay? And it is these rights, free press, free expression, freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, what are the most access to courts, all of this were brought to the Philippines by the Americans, except two rights. And you will know why, obviously. They said, the Americans said, McKinley said, respect the rights of Filipinos, except two rights. The right to arms, they did not recognize that, and the right to a jury. They obviously did not trust us to judge each other, and so they did not bring to the Philippines those two rights. And then, so all these years after that, we're going to have in the American Organic Acts the laws that govern the Philippines when we were a colony, McKinley's Instruction, Philippine Bill of 1902, Jones Law of 1916, and finally the Tidings-McDovey Act of 1934. We have the American Bill of Rights minus those other rights. And then, when we had the 1935 Constitution, we also have the same rights. The 1970 Constitution, a product of martial law, not only recognized the same rights, but expanded them. Go figure. A dictator still establishes a constitution that has those basic rights and more. Our Bill of Rights is much better than the American Bill of Rights. We have added rights again and again. The U.S. Bill of Rights is pretty much the same from 1791. The interpretation has changed to the U.S. Supreme Court, but the Bill of Rights is the same. Ours have changed. And obviously, in the 1987 Constitution, following first the overthrow of Marcos in 1986, where the Bill of Rights of 73 was recognized, in the 1987 Constitution, we expanded the rights even more. The 1987 Constitution is what do you call it? It's a wonderful Bill of Rights. It's a great Bill of Rights. It's one of the greatest Bill of Rights in the world in terms of rights, not in terms of implementation. And that is true not just during the Duterte administration, but all the administrations after Marcos. At this point, let me just also say a few words about the international sources of human rights. There are four sources, main sources. The first two are also historical. They're 1948, the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. The International Covenants on Human Rights, there are several of them. Civil and political rights, economic and cultural rights, anti-discrimination, etc. Followed in the 50s and 60s. And more lately, we have the Rome Treaty and the International Criminal Court, which is a way of implementing those rights. Philippines was a party until Duterte took us out because she is now subject of an investigation under the International Criminal Court, which investigation continues even if we're no longer parties. And we established a United Nations human rights system of special rapporteurs, of working groups that looks at compliance of all of this body of human rights. I'm not going to go to each specific of those rights. I teach also a course on human rights in several schools. But suffice to say that our Constitution, our Bill of Rights, actually has incorporated already all of these rights. And I spoke to a group of judges kanina in the Philippine Judicial Academy, where I'm chair of the philosophy department. And I was telling them that, the truth is, nauna tayo palagi. Ang Philippine law is 10 years ahead of international law in terms of human rights, in terms of environmental law, which is my other field of expertise. It's something to be proud at, but it's also something to regret because our implementation is not really the best, as we know, no? As I've said, our implementation of these rights, both domestic law and international law, has not been the best. And the best example of that is the Marcos era. When I teach this to my Consi Law 2 students, my Bill of Rights students, second constitutional law class of law school, to show them how it works, how to tell them a story. Maybe it's a better way of putting it. To tell them a story of human rights in the Philippines, I use the story of one man who's still alive, subject of a lot of jokes, but God bless him that he's still alive, surviving. Juan Ponce Enrile, former senator, former Senate president, former administrator of martial law, customs commissioner first, later on defense secretary of Marcos, later on leader of the EDSA revolution. Enrile has been on both ends of human rights. He has violated human rights as the administrator of martial law. So he had 3 cases there, actually 4 cases there. Aquino versus Enrile, Garcia Padilla versus Enrile, Ilagan versus Enrile, Acavilla versus Enrile. All these cases are bad cases that the Supreme Court decided. Basically, the Supreme Court said in these cases, we don't have to follow human rights if what is concerned is our national security. Same reasoning that Duterte follows in the war against drugs, or now in the anti-communism, the red tagging. Addicts and communists will destroy our country. So we will destroy them and everything on the path, everyone around them, everyone that we suspect, destroy them all because that is good for the country, good for national security, good for the youth. Just remember, Duterte is killing drug addicts for you. He always says that para sa mga kabataan, for the youth. That was the reasoning of the court in these cases. This was Ninoy Aquino, who should have been released. There was no crime he committed. But no, court said we trust Marcos. Marcos must know something about Enrile. Garcia Padilla, several activists were arrested. As we also saw in Naga last week, no basis, planted evidence. I know some of the people there. But the court said we will not get involved because national security is involved and this is rebellion. The state must be given. Ilagan versus Enrile, 3 lawyers from Davao. I know them actually. 2 of them have died, but 1 is still alive. They're friends of mine. They were arrested without warrant. Complete violation of human rights. But the court said, well, later on the cases were filed. So those guys stayed in detention for a while, but again, no basis. So like, for example, your fellow student says, I will tell you, she will be released. That's for sure. If they continue with her, she will be acquitted. That's for sure. All my clients, human rights clients, in the last 30 years have never been convicted. But some of them stay in prison for 5 years, for 10 years. Just imagine how unjust that is. All because, allow the system to go on, to proceed because of we have to sacrifice human rights for national security. But then Enrile survived martial law to see good cases decided by the court. Acavilla versus Enrile. Fidel Acavilla was actually convicted. He was already served his sentence, so he should not be in prison. But he was still in prison. Marcos would not release him. But the Supreme Court after EDSA said, no, release him. In fact, if he was not convicted, we will order his release because there's no basis for his charges against him. And then in a sudden twist of fate, Enrile now becomes the target of the government. In Enrile versus Salazar, Enrile was charged as the mastermind of the 1989 coup d'etat against Cory Aquino. And he was arrested and sent to jail without bail. Judge Salazar, my professor in UP Law, ruled that Enrile should not be released because this is a technical thing. He was charged with a crime of rebellion complex with murder. Rebellion is not a crime punishable by in the Philippines, it's not punishable by life imprisonment or death penalty. So actually it's bailable right away. That's why SASA, for example, they will not charge rebellion or subversion against her because she has to be released right away. They will plant evidence, they will plant the guns or the explosives against all of these activists. So then they will charge illegal possession, which into my mind is completely illegal by itself. Because if you charge a person of being a rebel, an NPA, an underground member, whatever, you should be charging rebellion and not these other crimes. Because that's the crime that's committed. Not that I'm saying that these activists are committing the crime, because I know they're not. So I work with them. I've worked with them for 30 years. Enrile versus Salazar says, no, you cannot do this to Enrile. The Constitution does not allow it. Fast track to another 15 years, 25 years, to 2015. No, 15 years. Sorry. No, 25 years. Enrile versus Sandigan Bayan. Enrile now for graft and corruption. The Napoles case. The PDAF. Charge of pocketing his pork barrel. And again, the Supreme Court said we will release him on bail for humanitarian grounds. Although here I have to tell you, the Supreme Court, while I think they made a right decision with Enrile, unfortunately, they only applied it to Enrile. They should apply it to every sick prisoner that's not a threat to people. They should apply this to political detainees. They should apply this to mothers. For example, mothers of political detainee mothers who give birth to babies during their detention. But the court has not done that. There's still contradictions in the Supreme Court, and that's really, I'm nearing the last part now of my talk. And that's really our experience of human rights. So I'm proud of our human rights laws, but not proud of our implementation because it's just so contradictory, it's just so mixed. These interesting cases, the Genuina versus De Lima and De Lima versus Guerrero. De Lima is your kababayan from Camarines Norte, Senator De Lima. Disclosure, I am very active in the work to have her release. I'm a convener of the committee to release Senator De Lima. But it's not that she's perfect too, because she actually committed, and she knows this because I tell her about it and say it's not personal, but you did a mistake, and Pinoy should made a mistake. They persecuted GMA without evidence. Arrested her, put her in prison for 5 years, and that wasn't right. Doesn't matter. The politics should not matter for human rights. That's my lesson. That's my takeaway from here. And so the Supreme Court in 2018, and that includes people like Justice Carpio, Justice Leonen, people that were appointed by Pinoy, unanimously said that Pinoy and De Lima should not have stopped GMA from traveling abroad, because the right to travel is sacrosanct unless there's charges against you. Unfortunately, that same court in 27 did violate the rights of Senator De Lima, because Senator De Lima, there are no charges against her. They are charging her officially of being a pusher, of being a part of the conspiracy to traffic drugs. But their particular evidence is all about she was trying to raise money for her election. That's a contradiction in terms. If that's true, if they do have the evidence of that, and I don't think they have anyway, they should have charged her with bribery, which means she would not be in prison, because bribery is a bailable crime in the Philippines. But I don't want to end with a bad note on this. I want to say, though, that the Supreme Court has also had really great cases that equal great cases in the world. And one of them is the Duterte Court last year, People versus Sapla, which is the rule about search warrants, the rule about arrest warrants. You cannot search a person's house, a person's car, stop a person. You cannot arrest a person unless you have probable cause. You cannot rely on gossip. You cannot rely on, whispers. There must be a belief. That seems to be simple, right? But yes, but they do not follow that. They did not follow that until People versus Sapla. Many people have died in the last 3 years without even a suspicion, a real suspicion that they have committed a crime. They started with people who use drugs. They're doing that to activists now. But People versus Sapla is very clear that they cannot do that. Broca versus Enrile was decided in 1990, and it's actually said that all criminal prosecution that is political in nature, so I would say Delima is political, red tagging, arresting people after they have been red tagged, that's political. There's no evidence for all of that. Supreme Court has said all of that is null and void from the beginning. But people already suffer, no? Even if in the end you win the case, if you're detained for 6 months, 3 months, 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, that's an injustice already. And so I think it's very important for us to fight and to express and to push very hard for people to be released from detention, for people to be given their due justice, due process as early as possible. There are 2 cases right now pending in the Supreme Court. The Tok-Hang case, where we have questioned the courts, the war against drugs. I think we will win that case, but the court is taking its time. Probably we will end up with an International Criminal Court, probably by June, proceeding with a case against President Duterte and probably General Bato, now Senator Bato, because it's crimes committed from 2016 and 2018 when we're still parties to the International Criminal Court. They're pending petitions on the anti-terror law because the anti-terror law creates danger for all of us. Because even constitutional exercises of free speech and expression, and even helping in storms, you're going to be very vulnerable about that because you have lots of storms, lots of disasters. Even all of that can be given a color. Community pantries have been given a color, as you know, red tag also. But I don't know how the Supreme Court will decide. I can't comment on what's going on, but it will take a few more months before they make that decision. And then we are in the middle of a pandemic. And as I said, you understand the pandemic like it were a war. You need to do that. That was my last slide. You have to understand the pandemic as if you're in the middle of a war. And the most tempting thing in wars is to set aside all the rules. Diba? Kasi survival is the fittest. Survival of the fittest ang gusto natin, di ba? So the most tempting thing during a war is no rules. Yun ang justification ni Marcos na bakit siya nahuli ng marami na wala namang kabili charges. Yan ang justification ni Duterte, bakit ang daming namamatay. Di ba? Because it's a war. And in a war, there are no rules. I'm sorry, in war, the rules are even more important. Humanitarian and human rules are even more important during a war than any time, because the stakes are higher during a war. And so the pandemic, the stakes are higher for all of us, really, because our ability to mobilize, our ability to go about things is limited. We've pushed back, but it's challenging. For example, it's very clear that in a pandemic, nobody should be arrested, because arrest and detention increases infections. I mean, except the most violent crimes. I mean, that, of course, someone rapes someone murders someone, that has to be arrested. But everything else, including violation of protocols, there should be no arrest for that. Certainly not for political crimes or political acts, exercises, as distinguished from truly carrying a gun and fighting, right? Actually, we got the DOJ and the police even to say a month ago, finally, no more arrests, because it's just crazy to arrest people during this time. But then the president just the other day says, I want people not wearing masks properly to be arrested. So they say they will arrest people again. There is no crime committed when you don't wear your mask properly, when you don't wear your shield. There's no crime committed. Not that you don't follow it. I want you to follow it. But there is no crime committed. You cannot be arrested when you do these things. Well, they say, well, there's no national law for sure. That's why ordinances daw. Okay? But even those ordinances like that, especially those that says you cannot go to one place or another, you cannot leave your house, ordinances like that are, in my view, unconstitutional. So let me end with that. I mean, and I always end by doing something philosophical with I actually have just one final slide. Covadis human rights. Where do we go from here in the Philippines? And I always emphasize the importance of moving from what I call a very personalistic concept of human rights, which is the personalistic concept of human rights is we protect the rights and respect the rights of people because of their inherent nature, image and likeness of God, reasonable being, rational being. That's French philosophy, that's Greek philosophy, that's Chinese philosophy. That was the original basis of human rights. And that's still correct. Now, when you're treating another person, in philosophy, you would have learned the philosophy of Emmanuel Levinas, for example, or Martin Buber, whatever has been taught to you in philosophy of the human person. But it's all about respecting the otherness of the person, right? And that's cool. That's good. But we should not end there. And I always emphasize with this last idea of a justice approach. The Philippines is not the best place for human rights, even if we have good laws and good norms. It's not a perfect place. There's terrible injustice happening in our country, even as I speak. But we can push back. I don't think we can make it perfect. That's probably outside our pay grade. We can work to make this earth, the kingdom of heaven, but even in theology, we would have been taught that it will not end here. It's eschatological, as they would say. But we can make it less unjust. Or even better, we can make our country and our society least unjust. And how do we do that? We do that by building capacity to fight for justice, by making sure that we and you as students should be at the forefront of that, Professionals should be at the forefront of that, but the poor are the most important actors, have the capacity. I borrowed this from Amartya Sen's concept of justice, the capability approach to give people to work so that all of us and everyone has the capacity and capability to assert their rights and for their rights to be respected. And that's really the way forward on human rights. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Lavinia, for the wonderful talk. Okay, we'll now proceed and open the floor for comments and questions for our speakers. If you have any, we encourage to share your thoughts, which can be in the forms of question or sharing your insights or realization. To facilitate the open forum, kindly please enter your questions or comments or reactions down on the chat box below, and I will read them for you so that our speaker can address it. Okay? While you are getting ready with your questions, we will have our first reaction from Mr. Jerwin Villacruz. Jerwin?
Hello. Good afternoon, attorney. I'm Jerwin Roy R. Villacruz, a second-year BSP in Legal Management in the university. I shall be asking a question with respect to the core principle of human rights. Article 2 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights provides that everyone is entitled to all the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration without distinction of any kind, such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status. Furthermore, no distinction shall be made on the basis of the political, jurisdictional, or international status of the country or territory to which a person belongs, whether it be independent, trust, non-self-governing, or any other limitation of sovereignty. These rights are found on the subsequent provision in Article 3, which provides that everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person. Universalism argues that every single right enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights should be applied to every human being the moment they are born in any part of the world. However, relativism argues that beliefs, values, and rights should be understood as a product of culture and thus varies from culture to culture and place to place. What is humane in the jurisdiction of Saudi Arabia, China, or indigenous communities may not necessarily be humane in advanced Western liberal democracies such as United States. Cultural practices such as child marriage or genital mutilation as a form of tradition may be accepted in one country but abhorred in another jurisdiction due to human rights concerns. Same-sex marriage, say for example, might be contradictory to the Sharia law faithfully adhered to by Islamic community in Saudi Arabia. What is protected speech in one country may fall under hate speech in another jurisdiction due to cultural and religious values. While there are generally accepted values such as protection of right to life, liberty, or property, the implementation of those rights depends on the jurisdiction involved. The common criticism to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is that the document itself reflects Western-based individual rights rather than the communal rights of some non-Western nations. Given that countries have sovereignty in their international affairs and there are various cultures across the globe, is it proper to subscribe to the universalist school of thought with respect to human rights? And what are the cultural barriers that human rights need to overcome given the fact that human rights are not always compatible with some values in some countries?
I have to say, that is exactly what the anti-human rights people would say. And that's a completely wrong argument, just to say that. It is not to say that the same, in other words, there are universal human rights. All the countries in the world accept the human, even Saudi Arabia accepts the universal human rights. That is not an issue. They become parties to the convention, etc. The fight, the cultural part, is over the implementation of certain things, which are not really major but are more minor in nature. No? And so, the death penalty, for example, there might be 10 countries still that are for the death penalty. That's just 10 countries left. 190 countries already accept it. In other words, that kind of thinking is a bankrupt kind of thinking, long abandoned, to be honest, Jerwin. Now, having said that, what you need to know, and here's the difference. Now, that's why I emphasize that you either have a natural law approach, which is the nature of human persons, which makes it universal regardless of what culture it is, because human beings are the same everywhere. And for some of those rights, there can be no derogation for those rights. There are some rights which will allow derogation. The least important rights will allow for derogation. It's a question, from a legal point of view, it's a question of whether you're a party or not. Most human rights conventions has 90% compliance. So the example that you gave, that's so few of them, rather than that doesn't make it a case. But more than that, that's why a justice approach is needed, because what we want to make sure is in countries where certain groups of people are oppressed, then the challenge or the duty or the task is to build the capacity of that. Saudi Arabia is a good example. You know that Saudi Arabia is a member of the Human Rights Council. To be a member of the Human Rights Council, they have to accept all the human rights covenants. So that completely false yung premise na Saudi Arabia or China. China is a member. They do. It's how they interpret it which is not about culture. It's about power and who has power. But in terms of accepting the norm, there is universality in the acceptance of the norm. So Myanmar, for example, they will say they accept all of these norms, but their enemy is the people that are against them. And they blame those people and they justify what they do. It's the same thing in the war against drugs or in red tagging. Your enemy, the justification is that they are enemies of the state and enemies of the national interest. But that is bullshit, because we know that's not true. We know it's about power. And that's why you have to push back and not accept that reasoning. Because if you accept that reasoning, that means you will allow anyone to just kill anyone as long as they have power.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Lavinia. And thank you, Jurin, for your question. Okay, it's time for questions or insights from other students in our Zoom and, of course, YouTube live audience. I'm sure Dr. Lavinia is very willing to respond to your queries relative to this topic. And I am seeing someone is raising their hand from Mr. John Ray Del Mundo. John Ray?
There's a question also from Angeline in the chat.
Hello po. Can you hear me po?
Yep.
So my question, sir, is very simple. Do you think po, when does human rights becomes inhumane?
It never becomes inhumane. Human rights is absolute and universal. And you always have to fight for it. You have to love your rights and embrace it.
Is it despite the way it is implemented po ba?
Of course, it can be, but that's not human rights. It's the way it's implemented that is imperfect.
Oh, thank you, sir.
There's a question about progressive organizations, activists. Well, this is happening all over the Philippines. And this is not the first time it has happened. The only response to state repression is to fight it. That's the only response. To assert even more. Because eventually we will win. Eventually the repression stops, at least for a while. As I said, time and again, I have been in this as a lawyer 30 years, as an activist myself 40 years, as a philosophy teacher, which was my first career. I was also an activist. And I've seen this again and again in the Philippines, that you win, then you lose, you win, you back. There's a backtracking, there's a forward step. You just have to keep on being focused on what has to be done. I can answer the two questions that are there by Kyle and Lorna in the chat. In the Philippines, protests are effective historically. In Russia, in China, in Myanmar, it remains to be seen because there's so much more violence there. But in the Philippines, time and again, we've won. The appetite for violence, mass violence in the Philippines is not, the tolerance is not high. And then the other question that was asked is about, no, there's no immunity from suit in the International Criminal Court. In fact, it is designed for presidents and heads of states and other leaders. Maybe two more questions.
Good afternoon po. Since Jech is having some technical issues, ako na lang po magbabasa ng isang question po dito from Laika. Does the International Court follow the doctrine of the President's immunity from suit?
I said no, it doesn't. In fact, the International Criminal Court is based on the premise that it is reserved for presidents, leaders, generals that commit war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide.
Okay,
did you hear
po.
my answer?
Yes po. Thank you so much po. Jech, are you okay na po?
Thank you, Carla.
Bit of internet problem on my side. There is a question from an anonymous saying that, sir, are you in favor if there is a course or subject that will be implemented studying primarily about our human rights? In any case, is it feasible or is it okay? Is it just like a seminar or a program? Any thoughts?
It depends on the major, diba? If you need it or not. I don't want to go into it, but certainly it can be incorporated into philosophy, philosophy of man, if you have that subject. It can be into theology even. It can be incorporated into political science. No, I don't know if it's required. It should be required as a subject by itself for every major, because that might not be needed. But certainly it should be a subject for people that go to law. In law school, you have it as an elective, but you also have it under constitutional law too.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. To our participants, we highly encourage you to please send your questions to our staff here at the Zoom.
But I can stay only up to 4:30 na lang. Sorry. Heck, I have another class.
Oh, okay, sir.
So maybe 2 or 3 more questions.
Yes, po. Now we have from Lemuel La Rosa. Is to run and succeed from Lemuel La Rosa, second year BS.
I saw that. I'm not gonna talk about specific persons. It's too early. Those of us who have followed Philippine elections, the year before the election is very different from the actual elections. What happened? So, it's not very helpful to speculate. However, this I would say that the stakes are very high in the next election. The stakes are very high for national territory. Will the Chinese be taking over the Philippines, many parts of our territory? It's very high. The stakes are very high for the economy and including the environment. For example, they're opening up the country for mining. Most of those will also be Chinese mining companies. Climate change, a big problem for Bicol, for many of us. If the president that takes over doesn't understand the problem and how to deal with it, we're going to be in real trouble. And human rights. Human rights. If we normalize the war against drugs, if we normalize the red tagging that the government is currently doing, we're in for a very, very bad next 6 years.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. And with that, I believe with the time we have, that will be our last question for today.
Thank you.
And of course, yes, thank you.
So can I go?
Okay, ito na po. Office of Student Affairs, Ateneo de Naga University presents the Certificate of Appreciation to Dr. Antonio G.M. Viña in grateful recognition of his expertise and service as resource speaker in the alternative class program. All rights reserved, understanding and protecting human rights in the Philippines, held on May 7, 2021. Given the 7th of May 2021, at the Ateneo de Naga University, City of Naga, Philippines. Signed, Rodolfo S. B. Virtus Jr., the Director of Student Affairs, Janet B. Badong Badilla, Executive Director for Mission and Identity, Dr. Alfredo C. Pabay, Vice President for Higher Education, and Father Roberto Ezequiel N. Rivera, S.J., the University present. Once again, thank you very much, Dr. Lavinia.
Thank you also.
Yes. Okay, now we have come to the end of this afternoon's webinar. But of course, before we all leave the Zoom room, please be reminded to fill out the evaluation forms we posted in the Google Classroom. The certificate of attendance shall only be awarded to those who accomplish the evaluation forms. Make sure that you input the correct spelling of your names on the evaluation forms. Otherwise, your certificate's name shall be misspelled. Of course, we hope that you enjoyed this talk and gained insights and new learnings from the talk and conversation. Thank you for being with us in this alternative class program of 2021. We are still in a pandemic, so please stay home and take care of